The global situation has fundamentally changed the way that we work. Now, more than ever, people are prioritizing flexibility in their work more than compensation. And one of the ways that they are fulfilling that need for flexibility is by working remotely. In this video, I'm going to share with you my personal experiences of the good and the bad to working remotely for over the past year, as well as 3 questions that you should ask yourself when considering whether or not remote work is good for you. Hey, I'm Will, and if you just made it to my corner of the internet for the first time, introduce yourself so I can say hi back. First, let's talk about what's good about working remotely. One of the best parts about working remotely is that it completely eliminates your daily commute. I don't know about you, but I hated the 30 to 45 minutes that I'd spend going both ways to and from my office. And now that's completely eliminated. So on a monthly basis, I'm saving at least 20 hours every single month that I'm then able to spend in other things that I actually care about. Flexibility and lifestyle has also been a strong suit of working remotely. I pretty much start and end my days whenever I want, and I have coworkers that are in all different time zones. And so we're able to make it work because our company is supportive of the flexible schedules. That being said, you will have to find a boss and/or a company that is supportive in this same way, but it is something that, generally speaking, remote-first companies are big proponents of. Aside from just having home-based flexibility, another pro of working remotely full-time is that I can always change up my setup whenever I want. I can go to a coffee shop if I want to work out of there, or I can just go to a different place and hang out there for a week or so in an Airbnb, then have to stay in my home the entire time when I'm working. This can be great if you have some good friends in other cities than where you currently live and you just want to hang out with them for some prolonged periods of time, or just check out other cities that you might be interested in moving to in the future. Another great part of the flexibility is that if I ever need to run an errand in the day, I don't have to think about it creatively from the context of how to achieve that errand close to my office. Instead, I know where everything is in my neighborhood, and so I can get things done faster. This also makes it a lot easier for me whenever I have a dentist or a doctor's appointment in terms of just scheduling and being more flexible to my respective doctor's offices. If you enjoy working your pajamas or the thought of doing so, hit that like button below. The last thing that I'd say has been a big pro of working remotely has been that it has really opened up an opportunity for me to get to know my neighborhood better. Instead of just supporting downtown shops when I go out to eat for lunch or something like that, I'm able to shop at local mom and pop stores, which help the local economy as well. Now that we've gone over the good of working remotely, it's only fair that we shift gears and talk about what's bad about working remotely. The first thing that I bring up is that you really don't get the same level of water cooler talk that you might be used to in a traditional workplace. Since working remotely for a remote-first company as well, I've noticed that it's a lot harder to form naturally strong connections and relationships with my coworkers than it was in my old workplace in which we had an actual in-person office we could meet up in. The biggest reason why this is because in most situations when you're working remotely, you're going to be so focused in on your work that you're not going to have as many natural opportunities to just take a break and hang out with a few of your coworkers in the office. What this means is that you have to be a lot more intentional when it comes to forming meaningful relationships at work in a remote-first company. Something that my company does now is we essentially carve out a half hour at the end of our all hands every single week to talk about high, lows, kudos, as well as gratitudes for each other that we want to share with the rest of the company. This allows us to connect with each other, learn more about each other's personal lives, as well as the typical things that might come up in regular water cooler talk. Typically, the way I've seen remote-first companies bridge this gap is to have some offsites or some retreats in which employees will all fly to an area and meet up together and spend that in-person time together. Honestly though, there really isn't a great all-in-one solution for this. This is simply a trade-off that you will have to come to grips with if you decide to work full-time remotely. Another thing that I'd mention about working remotely is that it's a lot harder to get onboarded in a remote environment than it is in an old school approach. The reason why is because if you're just the type of person that likes more in-depth overviews in your first few weeks on a job, you're not going to have that same feedback cycle and availability of your immediate manager to walk you through everything. So what this means is that you're likely going to spend a little bit more time in trying to bridge that gap of not having that in-person time to go over questions that you may have had for your onboarding. I've onboarded a number of team members and noticed that those that have just recently graduated and don't have a lot of experience in the workforce tend to have a longer adjustment period when it comes to working remotely because they still have to learn exactly how to even work in a productive sense and also manage their daily to-dos. A third drawback that I'd mention about working remotely is that there's less of a separation between your work life and your personal life, mainly because you mainly work from home. And so what that means is that it can be a lot harder for you to turn things off. When you're working remotely, you don't get that same visual cue that you have back in the office when you notice people are leaving and so it's time to go. Instead, you can end up working even longer hours because it's harder for you to turn things off. It can also mean in other cases when people are all working longer hours that they respect your boundaries less when it comes to slacking you late at night a certain message or request of theirs that they need you to get done. Something that I've personally done to help me with combating this sort of tendency of working more is to simply separate my work office from where I actually sleep. Just having my bed in a separate room allows me to have that clear separation between when I'm on and when I'm off when it comes to work. The last thing I'd share about working remotely full-time that is a drawback is that I have personally found myself sitting a lot more than I did back in the office. Back in my office, it was a lot easier to move around because I'd be running into different meetings throughout the day, and I also had a standing desk setup, which I'm still currently working on with my current setup at home to have that same standing desk support. That said though, something that I have done to level up my at-home setup is getting this chair, which has been great in terms of just supporting my lower back a little bit more. But it is something that I would tell you to keep an eye out for when you start to work from home, is make sure that you have an ergonomic setup that doesn't put too much stress on your body when you're working for so many hours in front of your computer. Now that we covered both sides of working remotely, I want to cover 3 questions that you might find helpful in asking yourself in determining whether or not remote work is good for you. The first question I'd ask is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how independent do you feel you are as a worker? In the case where you rank yourself a 7 or above, I would say that you probably align pretty well to working remotely. However, if you rank yourself lower than that, I would say that you might want to consider some of the drawbacks to working remotely, especially when it comes to your first 6 to 12 months in a remote job. The second thing that I'd ask yourself is, if you had to choose, you would consistently rank preference for flexibility over friendships or professional network 9 times out of 10. The reason why I say this is because, like I mentioned earlier, work relationships are a lot weaker when you're working remotely as opposed to going to an old school office. And so this is something to consider, in which if you really value having friendships with your coworkers and things like that, you have to either decide to be really intentional in how you're going to build that in a remote world, or prioritize those sorts of traditional office places. The third question that I ask yourself is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how self-motivated would you consider yourself? If you give yourself a 7 or above, I would say that remote work is potentially great for you because you're going to have that autonomy to set your own goals and work towards those goals. However, if you require something in which you like having a manager that checks in pretty regularly with you, that you can go to with feedback and have a pretty immediate feedback cycle with, then you might actually prefer to not work remotely and go more into a traditional workplace. A lot of the benefits of working remotely come from simply being able to be efficient with your time and not needing so much feedback from another person, because you're really going to be left on your own in most cases to figure things out, especially in the case where you're working for like a startup company. Tell me in the comments below, are you working remotely right now, or are you thinking about working remotely? If so, how's it going? If you made it this far into this video, you are the real MVP. Be sure you hit that like button below for your blue thumbs up trophy. Consider subscribing for more tech and entrepreneurship content, and check out more videos over here that YouTube thinks you might like.